My name is Fiona Clark. I'm 34 years old, and this story happened 2 years ago when my son Mason's tiny body was still fighting for every heartbeat. On paper, my life looks stable. I'm a software engineer at Microsoft in Seattle. Decent salary, good benefits, a job most people would consider solid. But ever since Mason was born, nothing in my life has been normal. Mason came into this world with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a severe congenital defect where half his heart might as well be missing. We knew about it when he was still in my womb. Doctors spoke in complicated terms and statistics, and all I remember from those early appointments is one sentence. He might not make it to adulthood. He might not even make it to school age. Mason's father, Alex, couldn't handle hearing that. When Mason was 6 months old, recovering from his first surgery, I woke up one morning to find Alex's suitcase gone. On the kitchen counter sat a crumpled note with 5 words. I can't do this anymore. Sorry. I remember standing in that too quiet apartment, looking at that note, then walking into Mason's room. He was lying in his crib, cheeks pale, a scar running down his chest like someone had drawn a zipper over his tiny body. He looked up at me with these big, clear eyes. In that moment, something inside me snapped into place. Alex had chosen to walk away. I chose to stay and fight. Over the next 7 years, we survived 3 major surgeries. Every time the nurses rolled Mason toward the operating room, my legs went numb. I'd wait in the corridor, hands clasped so tightly together my knuckles turned white, praying to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in. And every time, somehow, my little boy came back to me. We celebrated small victories. Fewer blue tints around his lips, fewer nights of gasping breaths. But all those operations were just temporary fixes, patching a crumbling wall that everyone knew would eventually give out. Then, 2 years ago, Dr. Anderson at Seattle Children's Hospital called me into his office. His gray hair was a little messier than usual, eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen. Fiona, he said, sliding some printouts across the desk, there's an improved Norwood procedure that just got promising results. For some kids, it's the chance at a near-normal heart. Near normal. I stared at the diagrams like they were drawn in a different language. What mattered was the hope in his voice. This could be Mason's best shot, he continued. Not just surviving, actually living. I felt something warm and terrifying bloom in my chest. Hope is dangerous when you're a parent of a sick child. You learn not to let it rise too high. How much? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated. That was my first warning. About $95,000, he said softly. Because it's still considered experimental, your insurance has already signaled they won't cover it. $95,000. I nodded like I understood, like that number wouldn't gut my entire life. I went home, tucked Mason into bed, watched his thin chest rise and fall, and made another quiet decision. If the universe wanted $95,000 for my son's heart, I would find it. The next year wasn't really living. It was surviving on purpose. I volunteered for every overtime shift I could, took freelance programming work at night, sold my beloved Honda Civic, and bought an ancient pickup with doors that squeaked every time you opened them. I drained my retirement account, the savings I'd scraped together since my first job. Every dollar that didn't go to rent, food, or Mason's medications went into a separate account, labeled only one thing, Mason's heart. There were nights I fell asleep at my keyboard, fingers still on the keys, Mason's inhale, exhale, the only sound in our tiny apartment. But slowly, agonizingly, the number in that account grew. 70,000, 75, 80. Finally, after nearly 2 years of living like that, I hit 82,000. We were still short, but then the miracle I'd been begging for arrived. Dr. Anderson called. Fiona, we have a surgery slot that opened up earlier than expected, he said. And I managed to get approval to reduce Mason's fee to $82,000 if you can commit quickly. For the first time in years, I sobbed out of happiness. I booked the date. I circled it on the calendar. I told Mason that soon his heart would be stronger than mine. The morning of the payment, I woke up before dawn. I packed Mason's favorite stuffed bear, a small bag of clothes, and the paperwork. Mason hummed Wheels on the Bus all the way to the hospital, his thin legs swinging off the waiting room chair. At the reception desk, Patricia smiled when she saw us. We'd seen her so often over the years that she felt almost like extended family. Today's the big day, right? She said, leaning over to grin at Mason. You ready to be even stronger, champ? Mason nodded seriously and kept humming. I pulled out my bank card with hands that were finally relaxed. That's right, I said. We're ready. Patricia typed in the amount, $35,000 up front to secure the slot, and swiped my card. A sharp red beep sounded. She frowned lightly, glancing at her screen. It says, declined. Sometimes the system's weird. Let me run it again. She tried again. Another red beep. The air in my lungs turned to ice. It might be a technical issue, she said quickly, clearly trying not to alarm me. Do you have another card, Fiona? I handed her my backup card, swallowing hard. That one had a small buffer, just in case. Just in case had always meant hospital, not this. She ran it. Red beep. Again. 4 tries, 2 cards. Same answer. Patricia's smile faded. Maybe you should check with your bank. I can hold the transaction for a few minutes. My fingers felt numb as I pulled out my phone. I opened the banking app, fully expecting to see some silly note about security holds. Maybe the bank had flagged such a big transaction. Maybe this was just one more bureaucratic annoyance in a life full of them. The screen loaded. Then everything around me. The white walls, the muted beeping, Mason's humming, all blurred into static. Balance, yellow. I blinked, refreshed the page. It didn't change. 0. The account I had poured my entire future into for 2 years was empty. Mom? Mason's voice floated from the waiting area. Are we going to see Dr. Anderson? I couldn't answer, not yet. My thumb fumbled on the screen as I scrolled down to the transaction history. 28 transfers, each between $2,000 and $4,000, all within 3 days. Carefully structured to fly under every fraud alert. My heart started pounding so loudly I could barely hear Patricia when she said gently, Fiona, if the payment isn't made within 24 hours, we'll have to give this slot to another child. I'm so sorry. 24 hours to find $82,000 I no longer had. I called the bank. The representative confirmed politely that all transactions had been validated with OTP codes sent to my phone. I never got any, I argued, voice shaking. Ma'am, they were entered correctly, the woman replied. Are you sure no one else has access to your device? Nobody else. And then, through the fog, a thought cut through like a knife. I hung up and opened my messages. The main inbox showed nothing suspicious, but when I checked the deleted messages, my stomach dropped. Dozens of OTP codes, all from my bank, all erased. Not a random hacker, not some faceless criminal on the other side of the world. Someone who had held my phone in their hand. Someone who knew my password, Mason's birthday, 051517. Someone who had access at the exact hours the transfers were made. I scrolled back to confirm the timestamps. 2:07 a.m., 2:34 a.m., 2:51 a.m. All on the nights when Mason and I had stayed over at my parents' house in Spokane. When Mason ran a fever and Mom insisted, it'll be easier if you're here. When I left my phone charging in the old kitchen, right next to where my sister's boyfriend, Kevin, stayed up late with his laptop open, blue light washing over his face. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But the pattern was there, mocking me. I turned around. Mason was still humming, legs swinging, completely unaware that his life had just been priced out of existence. I knelt in front of him, forcing my face into something that looked like a smile. Hey, buddy, I whispered, tucking a strand of hair behind his ear. We have to go take care of something first, okay? Then we'll come back. Okay, he chirped, trusting me completely. As I carried him out of the hospital, guilt burned through me like acid. I had promised to protect him. I had done everything right. And somehow, my son's life now depended on the same people who had watched me grow up. People I was suddenly terrified I didn't really know at all. I buckled Mason into the truck, wiped my eyes, and started the engine. There was only one place left to go. Back home, to the house where I was beginning to realize this nightmare might have started. The drive from Seattle to Spokane usually feels long but familiar. That night, it felt like I was driving through a tunnel with no exit. Mason fell asleep 20 minutes into the trip, his head lolling against the window, his stuffed bear tucked under his chin. Streetlights carved streaks of gold across his face. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, as if that alone could keep his heart beating. 24 hours, $82,000 that no longer existed, and the only people I could think to turn to were the ones I was starting to suspect. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, the old house didn't even look like the place I grew up in. The yard was cluttered with stacks of lumber, boxes of tiles, and a dumpster overflowing with broken cabinets and packaging. In the dark, it looked less like a home and more like a construction site. The truck engine rattled to a stop, echoing in the quiet street. I turned and looked at Mason. He was knocked out, lips parted slightly, his breathing soft. I didn't want to drag him into whatever this was going to be. "Sleep, baby," I whispered, brushing a hand over his hair. "Mom's just going to talk to Grandma and Grandpa. I'll be right back." I locked the doors and walked up to the front porch, every step heavier than the last. The minute I opened the door, I was hit in the face with the smell of fresh paint and sawdust. My childhood kitchen, where Mom used to burn pancakes and Dad used to drink his coffee while reading the paper, was gone. In its place was a showroom. Half-installed premium oak cabinets lined the walls. Granite countertops, still wrapped in protective film, rested on sawhorses. New stainless steel appliances were waiting in the boxes, labels still bright and crisp. The kind of kitchen you see in magazines. The kind of kitchen you buy when you have a lot of money. Money that I once had, money that had vanished. "Fiona?" I turned toward the living room. My mom, Linda, stood near a temporary bar cart, wearing a new silk blouse I'd never seen before. Her hair was freshly colored, nails manicured a glossy pink. Dad, Robert, sat on the couch with the TV on low volume, though his eyes weren't really on the screen. On the armchair, my younger sister Sophia lounged like she owned the place. A diamond necklace glittered at her throat, catching the warm light of the floor lamp. Beside her, Kevin was hunched over a brand new MacBook, crypto charts and green-red lines dancing across the screen. For a moment, it felt like I'd walked onto the wrong set, into someone else's life. Mom's brows knit together in confusion. "What are you doing here at this hour? You look terrible, honey. Are you okay?" I swallowed hard and stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind me. My legs wanted to give out, but I forced myself toward them. "It's Mason," I said, my voice already starting to shake. "Well, it's the surgery. Something happened." That got Dad's attention. He muted the TV and looked up, his expression somewhere between curious and annoyed. I took a deep breath. "Say it clearly. Don't fall apart yet." "Someone emptied the surgery account," I said. "All of it. $82,000. Gone. I only found out at the hospital this morning when my card was declined. I have 24 hours to come up with $35,000, or they give his surgery slot to another kid." Silence. Not shock, not outrage, just silence. Then Dad frowned. "Emptied? How does that even happen? Are you sure you didn't mess something up with your budgeting?" My jaw clenched. "I didn't mess something up," I said. "There were 28 transfers over 3 days. The bank says every single one was verified with OTP codes that were sent to my phone." I saw Kevin's fingers pause over the laptop keyboard. Mom sighed, as if this were all just inconvenient. "Well, that's awful, of course. But what do you want us to do about it, Fiona? We've already committed all our savings to the renovation. The deposit's paid, the materials are ordered. We can't just cancel everything." Her eyes flicked toward the gleaming cabinets, as if they were more fragile than my son's heart. I felt something inside me crack. "I'm not asking you to cancel everything," I said slowly. "I'm asking to borrow $35,000. Just until the bank finishes their investigation. I'll pay every cent back. You know I will. Mason only has this chance." Dad shook his head and exhaled through his nose like I was being dramatic. $95,000 for a surgery that might not even work, Fiona. It's a lot of money. You can't just keep throwing everything into this. At some point, you have to be realistic. Realistic about my child's life. My pulse hammered in my ears. Being realistic is exactly why I've worked myself into the ground for the last 2 years, so that when this moment came, we'd be ready. I did it. I had it. And now it's gone. Sophia rolled her eyes and took a leisurely sip of wine. "You're always so intense," she said. "People live with heart conditions all the time. Mason looks fine. He's not dying tomorrow. Why do you always act like everything is a catastrophe?" I stared at her, the sister whose violin lessons and summer camps and first car my parents had cheerfully paid for. The sister whose necklace alone probably cost more than my truck. "Because it is a catastrophe," I snapped. "He needs this surgery. You've seen him, Soph. You've watched him turn blue just from running across the room." She shrugged, unbothered. "If he's meant to live, he'll live. That's fate." The words were ice water down my spine. I physically stepped back, like she'd slapped me. Kevin finally looked up from his laptop, his tone annoyingly advisory. "Look, Fiona, you're emotional. I get it. But putting all your money into some experimental surgery with no guaranteed outcome? That's not smart. You could be growing that money instead." He turned his screen slightly as if I'd care. "I just made 30 grand from Ethereum last week. If you'd listened to me before, you'd have more options right now." My eyes flicked from his MacBook to the half-finished kitchen to Sophia's necklace, then, unbidden, to the numbers that had drained from my account. 28 transfers, 2 to 4,000 each, over 3 nights. Nights when Mason had gotten sick, and Mom had insisted we drive up so she could help. Nights when I was too exhausted to do anything but fall into the spare bed and pass out. Nights when I'd left my phone charging in the kitchen, right next to where Kevin sat up until dawn, bathed in the glow of his laptop screen. My stomach twisted. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb hovering over the banking app as if the transactions might suddenly arrange themselves into an apology. "What are you doing?" Mom asked. "Checking something," I said quietly. I opened the app again, scrolling to the transaction list, scanning the timestamps I already knew by heart. 2:17 a.m., 2:43 a.m., 3:01 a.m. Every single one on the exact nights I'd slept in my old room down the hall, trusting that under this roof, if nowhere else, I could finally rest. I lifted my gaze slowly to Kevin. "Do you know how OTP codes work?" I asked. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Irritation? Alarm? Before he smoothed it over. "Why are you asking me that?" he shot back, a little too sharp. "Anybody who banks online knows what an OTP is." An innocent person would have just said, "Yeah, they're those codes your bank texts you," maybe even laughed. Instead, he wanted to know why I was asking. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. I realized Mom had stopped wiping imaginary dust from the counter. Dad's fingers had stilled on the armrest. Sophia's eyes were watching me like a cat watches a bird. They knew exactly what I was thinking, and none of them looked surprised. Just wary. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. "The transfers were made between 2 and 3 in the morning," I said, my voice barely steady. "On the nights we stayed here. My phone password is Mason's birthday. Everyone in this room knows that. I left it charging in the kitchen every night, right beside where you sit, Kevin." He scoffed and turned his laptop back toward himself. "Are you seriously accusing us of stealing from you? From your own kid? That's insane." Insane. No one rushing to deny it. No one saying, "That's disgusting. How could you even think that?" Just defensive tones and restless eyes and a new granite countertop my parents never could have afforded before. I waited, just for a second, for someone to say the words that would make me wrong. "How could you think that of us, Fiona? We would never." But they didn't. Mom's mouth pressed into a thin line. Dad looked away. Sophia picked at her nail polish. And in the silence, the truth settled over me like wet concrete. They weren't going to help. They weren't going to admit anything. And I was standing in the middle of the house where I'd spent my entire childhood realizing I had never really been safe here at all. My eyes stung, but I forced the tears back. I wouldn't break down in front of them. They didn't deserve to see that. "Okay," I said quietly, "I understand." Mom frowned, misinterpreting my calm as guilt. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Fiona. We're not an ATM. We have to think about our future, too." "My future is downstairs in my truck," I said, my voice suddenly cold, trying to breathe with half a heart. Nobody answered. I let my eyes linger on each of them one last time. On the parents who had always told me to be the strong one. On the sister who had always been the favorite. On the boyfriend who'd somehow become the center of their moral universe. Then I turned and walked out. The smell of fresh paint followed me down the hallway like a taunt. Outside, the night air hit my face, cool and sharp. I climbed into the truck, looked at Mason's sleeping face, and something inside me finally cracked open. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and let the tears fall in heavy, silent drops. They had chosen cabinets, counters, and crypto over my child's life. Blood doesn't mean what I thought it meant. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, forced myself to breathe, and started the engine. The road back to Seattle felt darker than it had on the way there, but one thing had become painfully clear. My son's life would not be saved by this house. Whatever happened next, whatever I had to do, it would not be with their help. I drove into the night with a shattered heart, and no more illusions about who my family really was. The drive back to Seattle was a blur of headlights and sleepless roads. I kept glancing at Mason through the rearview mirror, his small chest rising and falling softly, his stuffed bear trapped under one arm. I wondered if he could sense my fear even while sleeping. Children often can. By the time I pulled into our apartment complex, my eyes felt like sandpaper. My fingers trembled as I unbuckled Mason and carried him upstairs. He didn't stir, just sighed softly and curled his face into my neck. Inside, the apartment was silent. Too silent. I laid Mason on his bed and stood there a moment, just watching him. His hair was messy, his cheeks still pale, his breath slightly shallow, a reminder of the battle we fought every day. I shut the door gently behind me and finally let myself collapse onto the couch. That's when everything hit me at once. The betrayal, the money, the 24-hour deadline, the fact that the only people I'd ever called family had looked me in the eyes and chosen a renovated kitchen over Mason's heartbeat. My hands shook so badly I had to press them between my knees just to keep them still. At around 2 a.m., I heard tiny footsteps. Mason peeked out of his bedroom, rubbing his eyes with his fist and dragging his bear behind him. "Mom," he whispered sleepily, "why aren't you sleeping?" I sat up quickly and wiped my face. "Hey, sweetheart, bad dreams?" He shook his head slowly. "I heard you crying." That broke something in me. I opened my arms and he crawled onto my lap without hesitation. I wrapped myself around him, burying my face in his hair. Did I do something wrong?" he asked, his voice so small it made my heart twist. "No," I whispered fiercely, pulling him even closer. "You didn't do anything wrong, ever. Mom is just figuring things out." He nodded, his trust so complete it made me feel like the worst kind of failure. But right then, with Mason's tiny heartbeat thumping against my chest, weak, uneven, but still fighting, a new kind of strength ignited inside me. A steel-hard promise. I don't care who betrayed me. I don't care what it costs. I will not let my child pay for their greed. When Mason finally drifted off again, I laid him gently back in bed and returned to the living room. I stared at my phone for several minutes, fighting my own pride. But there was one person who had never judged me, never made me feel like a burden, never treated Mason like an inconvenience. Derek. We'd been dating for 2 years. He was good, steady, the kind of man who shows up when you need him and doesn't make noise about it, the kind who ties your kid's shoelaces without being asked, the kind who always sits beside Mason during checkups to distract him with bad knock-knock jokes. He had a past, an ex-girlfriend who bailed on him during an extremely difficult time in his family. It scarred him, made him wary of people who run when life gets complicated. Maybe that's why he always made sure he never ran from me. I dialed. He picked up on the second ring. "Fiona?" His voice was thick with sleep, but instantly alert. "What's wrong? You sound shaken." I swallowed down the tears. "Derek, I need help." "Where are you?" "At home. I'm coming." "No, I need—" The words tangled in my throat. "I need money." Silence. Not judgment, not hesitation, just stillness. "How much?" he asked, steady as ever. 15,000, I whispered, "just to secure Mason's surgery slot. The hospital gave us 24 hours. I swear I'll pay it back. I just need—" "Stop," he said gently. "Bring Mason here. Emma and I will take care of him while you handle the rest, and I'll send you the money right now." "Derek, I can't ask—" "You didn't ask, I offered." An hour later, I pulled up to his small wooden house. Emma, his older sister, opened the door before I even reached it. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "You look like you've been through hell." She crouched down to Mason's level. "Hey, buddy, want to come inside? We've got cookies and a TV bigger than your mom's whole living room." Mason nodded sleepily, clutching his bear. Inside, Derek placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Go, do what you need to do. We've got him." My throat tightened. "You're sure?" He squeezed gently. "He's family, Fiona." And in that moment, those words healed something inside me that had been shattered just hours earlier. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Derek, transfer complete, 15,000. I stared at the screen, breath trembling. Then I took a deep breath and got to work. I pulled out every credit card I owned, started cash advances, ignoring the predatory fees. $3,000, $4,000, $2,000, $1,800. My limits groaned, my future groaned, but I kept going. When I was done, I had scraped together another $18,000. That left me $15,000 from Derek, $18,000, credit cards, ixol $33,000. Still short. I parked my car in a Target parking lot, opened my laptop, and started applying for every emergency loan company I could find. Online banks, peer-to-peer lending, sketchy, fast cash places with terms that looked like they were designed to trap someone exactly like me. I applied anyway. While waiting, I drove straight to the Seattle police station. Detective Rodriguez, sharp eyes, tired face, took my case. She listened silently as I explained every detail. The timestamps, the password, the trip to Spokane, the sudden renovations, the diamond necklace, the exact nights the transfers happened. "Do you suspect anyone specifically?" she asked. I stared down at my hands. Saying it out loud felt like betraying something much bigger than myself. But it was true, and truth doesn't care about blood ties. My mom, my dad, my sister Sophia. A pause. And Kevin. Detective Rodriguez scribbled notes. This is grand larceny. Over $50,000. Identity theft. Electronic fraud. If we can prove this, they're looking at serious prison time. 5 to 15 years. I didn't expect the dark satisfaction that fluttered in my chest. Good, I whispered. But her next words hit like a punch. The investigation will take 6 to 8 weeks. Weeks when I had hours. I left the station fighting back panic. When I got back to my car, a notification popped up. Your loan request for $2,000 has been approved. Funds deposited. I gasped. My hands shook as I opened my banking app. Balance, $35,000. Enough to save Mason. I drove back to the hospital like the devil himself was chasing me, seeing red lights as personal insults, praying the seconds weren't slipping away faster than I could move. When I slammed through the hospital doors, Patricia saw me and froze. Fiona? I held up the cards with trembling hands. Run them. She did. One by one, the machine beeped green. 15,000, 18,000, 2,000. When the receipt printed, Patricia smiled. A warm, real smile that I didn't realize I needed. Payment successful, she said softly. Mason's surgery is scheduled for next Monday at 7 a.m. My knees nearly buckled. I did it. I saved him. Again. I walked outside into the cool afternoon air, feeling like I had lifted the world off my son's chest. But before I could take my first full breath of relief, my phone rang. Mom! The screen lit up, her name pulsing like a warning. I stared at it, and a part of me already knew this call wasn't going to be an apology. The phone kept vibrating in my hand, Mom's name glowing against the screen. For a moment I considered letting it ring, letting her voice fade into the same silence I wished she had shown Mason. But some pathetic, desperate part of me, the part that still hoped they cared, pressed answer. I barely got out a quiet, "Hello, Mom," before her voice exploded through the speaker. "How dare you call the police on your own family?" Her words were knives. Not confusion, not shock, not sorrow, anger. As if I had betrayed them. My fingers tightened around the phone. "I reported a crime," I said, my voice trembling. "Not my family. A crime." Mom let out a bitter laugh. "Crime? Are you out of your mind? After everything I've done for you? After everything we sacrificed for you and that—" She paused, inhaled sharply, then spat the last word like venom. "That kid." My stomach turned to ice. "That kid?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "That kid is your grandson." Dad's voice suddenly appeared in the background, colder than I'd ever heard him. "Fiona, you need to stop this nonsense. You're destroying the family. All this drama over a meaningless illness." Meaningless. The word made my vision blur. "His illness isn't meaningless," I whispered. "Mason's fighting for his life." Dad scoffed. "Some children aren't meant to survive, Fiona. You need to accept reality." Reality. The reality was that my son was a burden to them, an inconvenience, a reminder of the effort and empathy they'd never had. Then Sophia's voice chimed in, cool, detached, almost bored. "No one wants him to die, Fiona. You're just being dramatic. Not every child is going to grow up. Maybe it's nature. Maybe he wasn't meant to." A buzzing filled my ears, my throat closed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "You're talking about my son," I said shakily. "My child. You're talking like his life. Doesn't matter." Mom snapped, "And maybe you should never have had him. Look at everything he's cost you. And now us." That was it. I felt something inside me die. A cord snapping, a final thread severing. Without another word, I hung up. I threw the phone onto the porch railing so hard the crack echoed in the air. Then I stood there, shaking, my breath coming in short, painful bursts. They'd stolen money meant for my son's heart. But worse, far worse, they saw Mason as disposable. No mother should ever have to hear that. No child should ever be treated like that. I stayed on Derek's porch steps for a long time before I could steady myself. When I finally walked back inside, Emma looked up from the couch. Derek paused mid-step. Mason was asleep on their big sofa, curled around a blanket Emma had brought him. I realized then that love wasn't about who shared your DNA. It was about who showed up when the world collapsed. The surgery. The following week passed in a haze of hospital gowns, antiseptic smells, and sleepless waiting rooms. Derek and Emma never left my side. Derek rubbing circles on my back whenever I trembled. Emma bringing food I rarely had the strength to eat. When the nurses finally wheeled Mason toward the operating room, he reached out for me. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "Mommy's right here. I'm not going anywhere." It took everything I had not to fall apart. Hours crawled by. Every time shoes squeaked in the hallway, my heart leapt. Every beep of the intercom made me jump. Derek kept me grounded, Emma kept me fed, and together they kept me from losing my mind. Finally, Dr. Anderson emerged. The smile on his face broke me. "He did beautifully, Fiona," he said gently. "The procedure was a success. Mason's heart is functioning stronger than we expected." I collapsed into Derek's chest, sobbing so hard my whole body shook. He held me like he'd never let go. Months of healing and a new kind of family. The next few months were a blur of recovery. Mason was fragile at first, but each day he grew steadier, stronger, happier. For the first time in his life, he wasn't gasping for breath just from walking to the fridge. His cheeks grew rosier. His laughter grew louder. He slept without me, hovering over his bed, counting each inhale. Derek came over every night, bringing dinner, giving Mason sticker sheets and silly jokes, tucking him in bed like it was second nature. Sometimes I'd catch Mason calling him Uncle Derek, not on purpose, just because it felt right. One night, after Mason fell asleep, I found Derek sitting on the couch with a soft smile on his face. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "You fought harder than any mother I've ever seen." I blinked back tears. "I only did what any parent would do." "No," he said gently. "You did more." The investigation blows wide open. 6 months after the surgery, Detective Rodriguez called. Her tone was different. Not tired, not wary, but sharp and satisfied. "Fiona," she said, "we have full results. Can you come in?" I drove to the station with my hands shaking. Inside her office, Rodriguez slid a thick folder toward me. "What we found," she said carefully, "is much worse than you thought." Kevin had run a multi-layered crypto laundering scheme. Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, Privacy Coin. He'd transferred my money through so many conversion cycles it took a federal analyst to untangle it. Sophia had been forging invoices from a fake design consulting business to explain their sudden income. But the worst part wasn't the financial data. It was the recorded calls. Rodriguez pressed a button. My mother's voice filled the room. Cold, sharp, unrecognizable. Sometimes a mother has to make hard decisions. Fiona needs to learn to let go. That kid won't make it anyway. My dad's voice followed, distorted by speakerphone, but unmistakable. "I told you she'd throw everything into that child. Better the money go somewhere that matters." I stopped breathing. Rodriguez continued, "Kevin faces 10 to 15 years. Sophia and your parents are facing 7 to 12 years each for conspiracy, laundering, and fraud. They'll have to repay $145,000 plus legal fees." My blood felt like ice water. I wasn't angry. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't anything. I had lost my family long before they went to prison. The trial, late November. Courtroom packed. Cold fluorescent lighting. The air thick with judgment. Kevin entered first. Cheap suit, hair slicked, eyes glued to the floor. He pled guilty for a reduced sentence. Sophia came in next, wearing a dramatic black dress and oversized sunglasses indoors, like she was starring in a tragedy she wrote herself. Her letter of remorse was all excuses and manipulation. Then my parents. Rigid, emotionless, hands clasped, faces blank. No apology, no shame, no regret. Judge Martinez listened to hours of arguments, evidence, letters, testimonies. Then she looked at them, really looked at them, and said the words I'll never forget. "This is one of the cruelest betrayals of family I have ever seen. You did not merely steal money, you stole the hope of life from a child. 9 years for Mom, 9 years for Dad, 8 for Sophia, 10 for Kevin." As the deputies took them away in handcuffs, Mom finally looked at me. I expected remorse, or heartbreak, or realization. Instead, I saw anger. Even in that moment, she believed I had wronged her, and that was the last time I ever saw them. 3 years later, on a bright Saturday morning, I stood at the edge of a soccer field, the kind that smells like fresh grass, orange slices, and sunscreen, watching Mason sprint across the turf. Not shuffle, not jog carefully, sprint. His legs pumped with real strength now, his cheeks flushed healthy pink, his breath steady and full. He looked alive in a way I had never seen in the first 7 years of his childhood. Mason intercepted this ball, dribbled forward with surprising focus, then kicked from nearly 15 yards out. The ball sliced low across the grass and rolled straight into the corner of the net. The parents around me cheered. His teammates screamed his name. But I didn't hear any of it. I just stood there, hands over my mouth, tears burning down my cheeks. Because 3 years ago, I wasn't sure my son would live long enough to run across a field like any other kid. He turned, spotted me, and his entire face lit up. He ran straight toward me, laughing the whole way, throwing himself into my arms. Mom, did you see I scored? I hugged him so tightly he pretended to groan. I saw, sweetheart. I saw everything. And I meant it. Every struggle, every surgery, every heartbreak, every betrayal that could have broken us, every miracle that carried us forward. He was here, healthy, strong, mine. A different kind of family. After the trial, life didn't magically get easier, but it became clearer. The bank eventually recovered the stolen money, all $82,000, plus an additional $12,000 in interest and restitution fees. It arrived in phases over 14 months, long after the criminal case had closed, but it came. And over the next 18 months, I repaid Derek every cent of the $15,000 he'd given me. He had never once asked for it. The day I transferred the final payment, I handed him a printed confirmation. He barely glanced at it before shrugging. As long as Mason's healthy, he said, that's all I ever cared about. That was the thing about Derek. He didn't make grand gestures. He didn't need recognition. He didn't keep score. He just showed up. Every week, without fail. He brought dinner, helped with school projects, took Mason to soccer practice when I worked late, made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs on Saturday mornings. Emma became Auntie M without anyone explicitly deciding it. Their mother started sending Mason handmade scarves every winter and birthday cards stuffed with stickers. And slowly, almost quietly, these people became the family Mason and I never had. The kind who loved without conditions. The kind who didn't disappear when things got hard. The kind who didn't choose countertops and cryptocurrency over a child's life. One evening, after another long practice, Mason looked up at Derek and asked, "Can I call you Uncle for real?" Derek froze, eyes widening. Then he looked at me, almost asking permission. I nodded. And Derek knelt down, ruffled Mason's hair, and said, "I'd be honored, buddy." The ones who choose you. I never heard from my parents again after the sentencing. No letters from prison, no calls, not even an attempt at an apology. Sophia sent one email 6 months later, blaming Kevin, blaming stress, blaming the universe, but not one sentence truly taking responsibility. I deleted it without replying. Sometimes silence is the greatest blessing. And yet, whenever Mason asked about them, it still tugged at my heart. One night, after a small dinner of grilled chicken and broccoli, Mason's current favorite, he looked up at me with big, thoughtful eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "how come Grandma and Grandpa never come to my games?" I set down my fork, exhaled slowly, and chose honesty, the gentle kind. "Sweetheart," I said, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, "sometimes even people who are supposed to love us don't know how to be good for us. Sometimes real family isn't the people who share your blood." He swung his legs under the table, thinking. "But Uncle Derek and Auntie M come to everything." I smiled. "That's because they choose us. Family isn't just who you're born to. It's who chooses to stay, who chooses to love you." Mason nodded, understanding more than most adults ever will. He walked around the table and hugged my waist tightly. "You're my best family, Mom." And just like that, all of the wounds that years of betrayal had carved into me, the abandonment by Alex, the cruelty of my parents, the theft, the courtroom, all of it softened. Because this boy, this miracle with messy hair and dinosaur pajamas, was worth every fight, every sleepless night, every heartbreak. He was proof that love, real love, doesn't come from DNA. It comes from choice, where our story ends. If there's anything I want you to take from our story, it's this. Don't blind yourself with the idea that family never betrays. Sometimes strangers will fight for you harder than the people who share your last name. And sometimes the people meant to support you are the ones who break you. But also, don't lose hope. Because somewhere out there, you might have people who will choose you, even when blood doesn't. Derek and Emma chose us. And because of them, because of their love, my son is alive today. So now I leave you with the question that still lingers in the back of my mind. Did I go too far by calling the police on my entire family, or not far enough? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in my place? Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving space to stories that hurt before they heal. Don't forget to subscribe so I can continue sharing real, raw life with you. See you in the next story.